I am your host, Jahshua Smith. I am the program supervisor for Advise Michigan in the Metro Detroit region. And the name of this panel is College Access Inequity for Black Students. So rather than me introduce everyone, I would, starting with my colleague, Chris Rutherford, I think I will have everybody introduce themselves. Or actually, I'll introduce because virtual, you can't really see me. We're not in a real panel. I forget about how this is virtually sometimes. So I will kind of tap you on the side to say you're next. All right. Starting with Chris.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Rutherford. I'm the Director for Community Mobilization Strategy at the Michigan College Access Network.
And then Deja.
Hello, I am Deja Clemens. I am a college advisor for Advise Michigan. I'm also the Leader Corps representative for the 2020-2021 school year. Eastern Michigan graduate and JD pending.
All right, Taylor.
Okay. Hi, my name is Taylor Pearson. I am a second year college advisor with Advise Michigan. My current service site is Advanced Technology Academy. I don't know all the things you want me to say, but yeah, happy to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Delesiya. I am an Outreach and Engagement Vista here at MCAN. I also went to U of M, and Deja, I'm be with you getting that JD.
All right, hello. Oh, somebody else want to go? No, perfect. My name is Keela. I am a college advisor with Advise Michigan. My site is Robichaud High School in Dearborn Heights, and I am a OU alum. So, yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Ashley Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Detroit College Access Network. Let's see here. Undergrad, I went to University of Mississippi. I'm from the South originally, and then grad school, I went to Michigan State. Good luck to all those people getting those advanced degrees. Don't go into student debt to do it. That's my advice.
Ashley, can I share something else about your background because you are actual Black history in the building?
Am I Black history? Okay.
I heard somebody's a little nice with the basketball.
Oh yeah, former college athlete. I am a former college athlete. Was rated the best basketball player in the state of Tennessee when I came out of high school. Thank you, Josh.
So you were literally Mrs. Basketball.
I was literally Miss Basketball for the state of Tennessee and got a basketball scholarship to the University of Mississippi. Yeah. And I have a younger cousin now who plays for University of Tennessee. His name is Keon Johnson. You've probably seen him on ESPN, freshman, ready to be a lottery pick. So that it's a family thing.
Literally been watching him all season and had no idea you're related. He's nice.
Yeah, he's my cousin. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is our panel for today's discussion, and really just to give everyone a quick backdrop of one, how this panel came to be, just thinking about Black History Month as an initiative each year to kind of discuss in the realm of education, like that gap, that lack of curriculum in a lot of schools where a lot of students aren't necessarily learning about their history, or even if they're not considered, if they don't self-identify as a Black student, not getting a chance to hear about the efforts of African Americans to learn about Black history, what we consider the diaspora, the movement of people from Africa to Western countries, things like that. It's really notable to talk about Black history in a certain context within the frame of the work we do. And just to give a little bit of an introduction before I get into everybody's kind of like college access story, because that's how we always want to start. It's just like thinking of Black History Month and its roots with Kent State University as a very activist-led initiative, starting as Negro History Week and then transforming into Black History Month. Quite frankly, Negro is not a word that we use to identify anymore. and kind of noticing those social changes there, but also coming off the backbone of various like social unrest in the country, and taking that step to kind of advocate for more stories and more narratives to be told. So the other part of using this is kind of like a launch pad, that this is work that we should be doing to elevate the voices of the people who are student facing and sharing their experiences. And so the conversation doesn't stop here. The conversation doesn't stop here with our Black stakeholders. It certainly doesn't stop here for all our stakeholders of color, all the different underserved and under-resourced identities that we work with, that we see with our students. So we hope this is the first of many. And I'm happy to have everybody here to you know, not kick off Black History Month, but to keep the conversation going. I'm a big proponent of the idea of Black History Year, which means a lot of the concepts that you'll hear today, a lot of the questions, these are things our students are going to deal with on a yearly basis, on a rolling basis. And February has not and will not be a cure-all for a lot of the issues you hear. So I just ask everybody, be open-minded. We want to reserve a time for you to be able to ask questions towards the end of the panel, but the chat is also a way to check in with each other and share some of what your perspectives are. I'll be moderating that as I'm hosting. Internally, the biggest joke I've had with everybody is that it's going to be a challenge for me not to really get involved like a seventh panelist. So I really want to give not just our young people, but some of our most prominent partners in this work a chance to talk about Black History Month, college access inequity for Black students, and all these different ideas. So everybody introduced themselves in order. I think that order is great. I'd like to start with, what is your college access story, and who was an important Black mentor or voice who guided that pathway?
So that starts with me. All right, Josh. I wasn't there for the briefing, everybody, but I first got to thank Delesiya for letting me jump on her background real quick. I keep forgetting to upload it, but it was pretty sweet when I first saw it. So thank you for that. But nevertheless, my college access story was framed in growing up on the northwest side of Detroit to two parents who didn't finish high school. And both my mother worked as a paraprofessional in the Detroit public school system, and my father worked in the factory. And with that, growing up, I was always told that, you know, you're going to college. I was told by my mother. My father just said, when you become a man, you got to work. Like, I don't care what you do, you got to work. He didn't care if it was college, whatever. You're getting out of here and you got to work. And so I grew up not really thinking about college much. I knew it was an option. My mother had an older brother who had gone to college. He went to DeVry back in the 60s, early 70s, and had worked in corporate America. And so she felt like college was the pathway for me. My older brother got a scholarship. He didn't get a scholarship, actually, got partial scholarship to go to a very expensive private school in New York for art. He was an artist, which was discovered in middle and elementary school. And when he went to college, it darn near drained every dime that the family had to keep him there to graduate. And so when I thought about college, I thought about it was the most expensive endeavor I could ever have, and that it might not be for me, even though I went to a school that prepared people to go to college. But in my mind, I thought, that's on the back burner. I'll work first and figure out college later, because my family, I know that in order to go to college, your family has to support you. And my family has no more money to support anybody through the college endeavor. And it wasn't until Christmas of my senior year that my mother gave me 2 dictionaries. It was 2-volume dictionaries, or Funk and Wagnall dictionaries. And I'm like, why did she give me? At first, the box was so heavy. I was like, I got the dopest gift ever. But imagine my surprise when I opened it up and it was dictionaries. And in the dictionary, the first page she had written, to a young man who's going to college. And so it wasn't until through high school, because I wasn't serious about college, I didn't really keep my grades up. I was always labeled as smart and the smart kid, but keeping my grades up wasn't number one on my list, because like I wasn't doing anything where I needed grades after high school in my mind. So I managed to graduate with a high C average. and but was able to get in Project 350, which is now I think Apex Scholars at Wayne State. I was accepted also to a program at Western, but like I said, there was no money, and I ended up going to Wayne State, where my journey began. That's essentially my work at Wayne State. My time at Wayne State was very dynamic. Growing up in a city like Detroit, being in Detroit, at first I was depressed about being at Wayne State, and I spent nearly every weekend going to visit my friends around the state. But as I began to settle in at Wayne State and find my place there, became part of student movements, and my time at Wayne State actually culminated with the takeover of the building to create Africana Studies at Wayne State for 11 days. Degree granting department in Africana Studies, which still exists today.
All right, thank you for that, Chris. I appreciate that. And I know you'll talk some more about some of your experiences with Wayne State in just a bit, but going to pass it to Deja.
Very similar to Chris, nowhere near as distinguished as Chris, but very similar to Chris. I was told that I had two options to go to college or go to the military. I have the health of a 65-year-old man named Gunther, so the military was out of the question for me. And so I had to get to college some way, somehow. I didn't really know how it was going to happen, but my parents said I had to get out their house to do it. I went to a school very similar to the one that I served. So I served at Rutherford Union High School, and I went to Oak Park, a school in the suburbs, but predominantly Black. It was open enrollment. Even though I am from the city, my parents was like, we're not sending you to a city school. We want better for you, and you're not going to get it at a DPS school. So they sent me to Oak Park. And honestly, it worked. Did pretty good there. Joined the band. They were very heavily influenced by HBCUs, so that's where I thought I was going to go. Can play multiple instruments, but I wasn't good enough for HBCU fully. I got pretty good scholarship money. I probably could have went to Clark Atlanta full ride, but I wasn't really serious about that. And also with my health and everything, I needed to stay closer anyways to home. Ended up going to an on-site with one of the Black counselors at Oak Park, and she was just like, you can do it. We're going to figure out a way to get you out. You're not Pell Grant eligible. My parents, my dad worked at the factory. My mom was a teacher. I was right above Pell Grant eligibility. No, I was pretty high above Pell Grant eligibility. So paying for college was going to be a little bit fun. I was, like I said, a pretty average student. I got pretty much a B average by the time I graduated. But B average and not Pell Grant eligible does not pay for college. So I had to figure it out, had to do loans, but somehow we made it together and pushed it through. And 5 years later, I got my bachelor's degree.
And we'll definitely say that Deja is a very distinguished advisor already. With the element of time, will become more distinguished, and we will speak that into existence. I'm going to pass it on to Taylor.
Okay. So as far as mentors within my college access story, I feel like it's been several. So I'll start with my parents. My parents, neither one of them graduated from college. My dad started at Central State but didn't finish. And they did not want me to go to a DPS school similar to Deja. And so I was homeschooled for about 7 to 8 years. And then there was a program called Oakland Early College in Farmington, where I was able to be a dual enrollment student. So I was going to that high school and then also Oakland Community College. So there, while I was in high school, there was an OCC counselor who was amazing, an amazing Black woman, who just made sure that all my credits were where they needed to be. When I was stressing out, she was the one that pushed me forward. So I feel like a lot of us, on that journey have that person, like Deja had that counselor. So I ended up graduating from high school with my high school diploma and associates from OCC. And then from there, I went to Madonna University. which is a small private school, Catholic school in Livonia. And that was an experience, good and bad. It is predominantly white, of course, so that we'll probably get more into that later. But while at Madonna, I had a admissions officer who just kind of became like my person, another amazing Black woman who pushed me forward to graduating and getting my bachelor's. So I guess just to continue to say, like, there's always been a person, there's always been people I've been able to just find, or they find me somehow, to just push me forward and to continue on my educational journey. So now I have been accepted to a few grad schools, and I am figuring out where I'm going, depending on what these assistantships look like. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you for that, Taylor. And then to statistically note about Livonia, whereas Michigan has 5 cities in the that are among the country's most segregated in Detroit, Flint, Benton Harbor, and Saginaw, Livonia is also there on the other side of the spectrum for being, I think the last census I remember reading a few years ago was 92% white, just for context.
It was labeled the whitest city in America at one point.
Absolutely, yeah, 92%. Same way that Detroit's is around 90% Black. You can see a lot of disparity there between the school systems, things I think we'll discuss. All right, I will swing it to Delesiya.
Hey everyone, again, my name is Delesiya. So my story had some similarities to previous panelists. Growing up, I was always labeled the smart kid. Always my family kind of was just like, you're smart. So kind of became like a rational trajectory for me. Okay, I'm going to finish high school, I'm going to go to college and then get a job. That kind of just, so what was in my head since I was younger. That was kind of the path given to me, honestly. Before I even knew I for real wanted to go to college for myself, I was told, you're going to college. Like, this is what you're going to do. Like, especially because again, like I was labeled smart. So smart kids, you know, naturally they go to college. So I think it was roughly about, I'm going to say sophomore year, when I kind of decided for myself, I actually wanted to go to college, and I started to see, I guess, the benefits of college in the environment that I was in. So I kind of grew up in a place, wasn't the best neighborhood, I'll say that. Wasn't the best neighborhood or best environment. So around me, it was poverty, it was a lot going on. And I knew for myself that I wanted better. So for me, college was kind of my way out. I'd always gotten great grades through school, always in honor classes. Elementary school I did, and Sights and Sage. So again, I was a smart kid. Like, I never really had to try that hard. But sophomore year, I had a conversation with myself and I said, okay, I don't want to live like this. I don't, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but I want it personally better for myself. I wanted my kids to not have to go through that again, the way that I did. So I buckled down in school. I started to literally drive myself crazy with getting good grades. I remember my junior year, I took AP Chem. I got a B, which, you know, it's an AP class, so it's really an A. And I almost cried. I'm not gonna joke. I almost cried because I had, you know, I told myself from here on out, I'm gonna get straight A's, no B's, nothing else. I'm gonna get straight A's. So that was an obstacle I got over. And it's, you know, looking back, I can laugh at it now. But in that moment, I was actually a little disappointed. And my junior year, one of my friends, she was a senior. So I kind of got to see what the process would look like in terms of applying, and kind of got like hit with like a reality that you don't always get into your dream school. Unfortunately, she didn't. And that's kind of not something that I had like even fathomed. Like, I was like, okay, like I'm going to get in, but that was a reality. So that was something I had to think about as well. So senior year, I applied to a bunch of different colleges, but my top two were MSU and U of M. Literally did not decide until actually decision day where I was gonna go. And I ended up going to U of M. But the Black mentor that I had throughout all of my life is definitely my maternal grandmother. She, and again, I can laugh about it now, but when I was a young kid, it was annoying because it's like, okay, like I get like I need to get an education, but like you don't have to drill me so hard. But I'm honestly so appreciative of her actually drilling me that hard and stressing to me the value of an education and the fact that I need to get an education, because that kind of helped me along my journey and it kept me going and it kept me on the right track. There was a lot of different tracks that I could have taken, but I'm glad that I had her in my corner pushing me in the right direction.
Thank you so much for that, Delesiya. We're glad to have you as part of the MCAN staff today. Right, Keela.
Okay, so I guess to kind of start, I feel like all of our answers has been somewhat similar to each other, but I grew up on the east side of Detroit. I had two parents. They were married but ended up getting divorced, unfortunately. But I was the youngest of four, and none of my siblings went to college. So of course I was okay, you're the last child, you're going to college. We don't care what happens, you're going. And that's kind of how I grew up. When I got to high school, it was it was kind of I didn't think about it. I didn't think about college because it was kind of like I already knew I was going. But I guess my Black mentor was our college advisor. And she was just, this is what FAFSA is. This is, these are the HBCUs. This is like she showed us a new way of thinking about college, which I really appreciated. And so I always tell people when I'm at OU and they ask me like, oh, how did you choose OU? I really don't know. I applied to too many schools that I can't even remember. And one day I just woke up and I was like, look, I can't pick a school. I just want to go to school because that's what I've been told I need to do to make money and to survive. So, OU, not too far, not too close, might as well go. And so I went to OU and it was great. They had a Center for Multicultural Initiatives office, which I found refuge in really. That was kind of my saving grace for honestly staying in college half of the time. And so, yeah, that's my story.
Great. And for those who just joined, Keela has transitioned into being a wonderful advisor at Robichaud High School, sharing some of that background with her students and getting them to do design. And last but not least,
Hey,
Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. So one, I agree with what Keela just stated. Everybody had parents. Every one of our story, I've been writing this down. So I'm like, what are the things here? What are the lessons learned? But everybody had parents. And so that really speaks to how important it is that in our work that we engage parents in the conversation, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that really heavily influence all of us so far to go to college for the most part. So that's interesting. And then everybody had access to like a pre-college program or a bridge program or something that not only got them into college, but maybe helped them be successful. So that's another thing. My story is similar to everybody else's, I guess. A little bit different. My mom had me when she was in 9th grade. So, by the time my mom graduated high school, she always talks about walking across the stage and having me and my brother at her graduation. Born to teenage parents in the 80s in the middle of the crack epidemic, you can imagine. My mom was the youngest of 7 sisters, and she had seen so many people fall victim to alcohol. Her mom died of alcoholism and drugs. And so she really protected me and my brother from that and really she made really quality decisions for like a 19-year-old. Here I am like in my mid 30s with 2 kids. And I'm like, I don't know how she did it at like 19 and 20, but really thankful for that. But so both my parents worked in the factories, similar to everybody else. they worked in Nissan factories because I'm from Middle Tennessee. And I literally distinctly remember the conversation. They set me down at 13 and they said, hey, you're going to college. You're going to get up out of here. Just like what everybody else's parents said. But they said, hey, we have no money to help you pay for it. And so we believe college basketball is the way to go because you'll get a full ride and basketball will be your vehicle. And honestly, because I grew up in the rural South, so my hometown is tiny, 15,000 people. All we have is a Walmart and a Sonic out between Nashville, Tennessee and Huntsville, Alabama. I had never met a Black person with a college degree. Like literally never had a Black teacher, never met a Black person with a college degree. And so my family, for them, the only Black people they had seen like make it and get out were athletes. And so my family went all in on college sports. I started playing competitive basketball at the age of 12. And so as far as Black mentors to help me get through, I guess it would be my parents. But then I have to say I had not a Black mentor, but a 10th grade math teacher who just one day in math class was like, hey, Ashley, you're really smart. Weren't you in AP and National Honor Society? And I was like, what? Like I literally had never heard of these things. And this is a Caucasian female and probably one of my heroes this very day, and literally just like took my hand, walked me down to the guidance counselor, changed all my classes to AP. And, you know, I think I was going to go to college, but I feel like I was prepared for the rigor when I landed there because of that. Because when I got to college, I was one of the few college athletes that they let pick their own classes. The stuff y'all hear is really true. Like they really made all the college athletes, especially the football players and the boys basketball players, like they had to like major in criminal justice. That's what it was at University of Mississippi. And they literally picked your schedule. And I remember when I sat down with my academic advisor and they were like, oh, you're ready for Calculus 1, like as a freshman. And I wanted to be a pre-med major and they let me do that. And that was like revolutionary. Like everybody was in criminal justice. And I think I really credit her for that. So that's my undergrad story. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I remember I took my first Black history class at University of Mississippi and realized that I was on one of the most racist institutions in the country and didn't even know it because nobody had taught me Black history in high school. We're going to get to that, I'm sure. But it was a very empowering experience. And then my graduate story, I did have a Black mentor. So I went on, graduated, became a teacher, taught in the Mississippi Delta, and loved it. And I remember I was taking some graduate classes as part of the degree, as part of teaching. And I had this Black professor who was amazing. One of my actually first Black female professors I had in grad school. And she actually introduced me to Institute for Recruitment of Teachers. I'm gonna drop it in the link in the chat. And it's basically a graduate pathway for students of color across the nation. And so they help you apply to colleges for free. They waive all the application fees. They help you write all of your essays. And I know I applied to 14 different grad schools across the nation, got into about half of those. And then a lot of them packaged me as IRT, meaning they gave me a full ride, so full tuition, full fees. And then I made some decisions about getting a job on this, you know, that got me in student loan debt. We can talk about that later. But I do want to drop that. So if you're a student who's interested in going to grad school for free, I'm going to drop the link for that in the chat. But she was an African-American professor who gave me this information and really could have led to me getting a PhD for free. But I made my own choices. So.
Thank you for that, Ashley. And then once again, reminder that resources, this chat, we want to compile things because we're learning from some of you. Like everybody in this meeting is a stakeholder. So as you're learning from us, we're learning from you. If you see anything that any of the numerous advisors and coaches that are present today can benefit from, please drop those links in the chat. And as we transition to the next thing, I'm not panelist, like I said before, so I don't want to share too much of my story here, but I saw some interesting links that make me think about how cyclical inequity really is, because hearing Ashley's, how your college access story is so different, where there's actually sadly an inequity in the inequity of growing up in Detroit, where like when people say things like, I didn't have my first Black teacher until ... That was something that really, you can't really call it a privilege, but I had in first grade, you know, my first Black male teacher, thinking about going to a school-based academy that was like not just predominantly Black students, but Black curriculum. Black History Month was more of a spectacle with games. We literally had a game show that forced us to learn like that Sarah Boone invented the iron. I forget what it's called, but the iron stand, like that a Black woman did that. These were things that were present for us that would be different for a Black student who's not in an area where that's the focus, or where they're a part of the majority of their high school demographically. So there's definitely, and no one would look at how funding is for like Detroit public schools or Lansing public schools, et cetera, and say that that is a gift to be around other Black students, because technically we find that the culture shock in getting into college is where you see that inequity really start to stretch. And thinking about my college access story, having the privilege of being a second generation college student, where my mom went to MSU. And when I attended in 2003, her first standing order for me was find Dr. Richard Thomas, because this was the professor that had taught her pretty much history and urban planning when she was in school. He and his wife, June Thomas, she took both their classes. So junior year, I find Richard, I'm 20 years old, and I'm walking into class with my hat cocked back and my do-rag on, because I'm trying to be the Black person in the class who's, when I talk, I'm super intelligent, but dressing with that comfortability so that people could reconcile that with the stereotype. And he pulled me aside one day and he said, "Brother, I see you. I see you. You have to be yourself, and you have to show them like what it is that you really know, and it's their intelligence factor. You're not trying to put anybody on your back or on your shoulders. You just have to show up." And then he showed me this book and said, "And now you have to learn your history, because that's the only way that moving forward, you're going to teach people where we've made mistakes, what those true mistakes look like." And I want to use that kind of as a segue, because with Chris and Ashley, the expertise that you both share, I really want to pivot into talking about what does racism and inequity look like in this state for education, as something that has decades, centuries long, of precedence here, and how are we dealing with that today? So Chris, I'm gonna throw it to you to kickstart that conversation, and then with Ashley, some very intensely talking about the work you're doing at the Detroit College Access Network.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I just wanted to say too that, I'll give it from a historical perspective, and I won't be very long. And I know Dr. Johnson always has data. She's always dividing things up into sections and portions. So I know she'll have some good data to talk about Detroit and Michigan. But I think we also have to remember, especially during Black History Month, that to put it in the framework of history and where we come from, right? And knowing that for African Americans, education, learning, and innovation is in our DNA. And there's more research than ever now that shows that Africa is the cradle of civilization. I don't think there's any debate about that. But it is where we know that math began, and advanced algebra and architecture and all of the advanced things that we call advanced learning now. We know that historically those things began in Africa, at the first schools and universities in recorded history were discovered in Africa. And so with that knowledge, we know that the big disruption that happened to us was the transatlantic slave trade and the enslaving of Africans being brought into the Western Hemisphere. But because of the legacy of those enslaved Africans, they knew one thing throughout that brutal experience, and that education is power, and that knowledge is power, and that literacy is power. And enslavers also knew this, and so they built tools into the very fabric of this country to create this paradigm. And those tools we know today as white supremacy, racism, and of course even classism, because early on the white landowners didn't want poor whites to learn as well. And so some of those vestiges still remain, and we see them played out in the rural communities across this state. But we know that these tools still remain in place today, and it is this system that we continue to fight and to work toward equity. We know that simply put that the American education system was never built to serve African Americans, and it still isn't today. But nevertheless, we know that it's always been shaped and used by African Americans to, number one, further our progression in this society, and then number two, reclaim that piece of our own African legacy that education is knowledge, and that knowledge is our heritage. So even though our captors thought they had seasoned it out of us, if you will, through direct violence and subsequently through laws and policies, it is the one thing that we held on to, and it is the one thing, or one of the things that burns deeply within us as we continue the struggle in America. We know that historically local school boards across this country enacted laws that literally stated that no education would be provided to former slaves that would allow them to achieve the status of any white. And there are places where that language still lives today, and there are places where that's still a practice. We know that the quest by African Americans for education to be literate in American society has never wavered. So we know that schools, we know of schools that existed for over 30 years in the backwoods of the South, where slaves learned to read by moonlight or candlelight, unknown by their masters, under the duress, obviously, as we all know, of being killed for learning to read. We know that after slavery, Black schools led by Black people sprung up all around the South with enrollment and attendance rates greater than white schools. We know that the first Black universities were started 4 years after the end of slavery, the HBCUs, funded by white philanthropists, but led by Black people, and who also led the charge for free and universal education for all throughout the South. The movement for free and universal education across the South, in large part, spread because it was being fought for to educate former enslaved persons, but knew that they could not educate former enslaved persons without educating poor whites. And so we know that the movement to educate all, or universal education, was essentially led not only by poor whites, but also by poor Blacks to provide funding for all. And that's where you get, we will build a school system to educate poor whites, but we will make sure, as well as former slaves, but we will also not educate them at the same level to achieve equity within our society. And so we know that during some of the most brutal periods of racial segregation during Reconstruction, we used to beat the drum of education. We continue to beat the drum of education. We know that during Jim Crow and segregation, Black schools thrived, where we taught our own with our own curriculums. And we know that during the turbulent 60s and 70s, Black students led movements across this country to transform our schools into equitable places. And we know that during the school reform crisis that still looms up to now, when whole districts like Detroit were taken over by state governments, defunded and torn to pieces, that Black people stood up to fight against this aggression and continue to fight today. So the main thing that I want to leave, or that I want to say with all of that, is that we look at some of these, what seems like insurmountable challenges. We know that we didn't get here by accident. In Detroit, they used to do a conference called The African Child Placed in Crisis, right? We didn't walk into crisis. We didn't create our crisis. The circumstances that we still live through today are a result of being placed there through a society that never meant to educate the descendants of Africa. So the call to preserve our legacy of education is still great, and it is still the greatest aspect of all, and that every step we take will bring us closer to a more equitable society. Part of the work I mentioned earlier about taking over the building at Wayne State. Now, mind you, when we took over the building, the prevailing philosophy, and this was in 1989, that Africa had nothing to contribute to modern classical civilizations, even though it was enough evidence even then to document the foundation of classical civilizations within the global society. And that there was nothing to study in Africa, even though everything that's studied in the university may have been started in Africa. And so that was part of our fight to break those chains and that mindset around who African Americans are, who Black people are, who we were, and who we will be. But that is what cemented my work, being part of that experience in doing this work, right? How do we get more young Black students into the academic process? How do we go into those institutions? Because I knew that growing up in Detroit, which was a crucible of activism throughout my lifetime, I knew that when we fight, we win, right? The only battles we lose are the ones that we don't fight. And so how do I help more students get into college? How do I help students get into those places? Because everything in our society is based on what does the research say, or at least it's supposed to be based on what does the research say. And I know that the research says that when we go into these places, that it is part of our role and part of our work to transform these places for the students behind us. And we knew that creating an Africana Studies department would not only inform students at Wayne State, but it would form the Detroit metropolitan community, if not the country at large. We knew that these are the places where research dollars will go and come to in order to advance the ideology that African-centered education has a place in this society, and that America suffers from ignorance, not only of others, but of itself, and that this was the place in which this needed to be taught. And so as we begin to look at where we are in Detroit today, and where we are, know that, and how we are, know that we got here, that we are in this place because of a series of circumstances that's taken place over the last 200 years.
Wow. So Chris just dropped a whole lot of knowledge on us, 200 years of knowledge. So I'm not even going to talk. I'm just going to give people just like 30 seconds to react. Right. Drops the mic, walks away. Give people a couple minutes to just kind of react. I'm a firm believer, I don't know. Let's just give everybody a couple minutes to react. And then Josh, if you're okay, maybe folks can ask questions or maybe just quickly react to what Chris just stated.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that. So if you have anything that you want to share in the chat real quick, we'll definitely give that space right now. I think we can always do my spiel that for those who are just joining us, this panel is really centered around college access inequity for Black students. So yeah, thank you definitely, Chris, for giving the widest context of what that looks like. And it's something to remember. You'll often hear people talk about how far long ago slavery was. And the reality is, much like how we process trauma in a much more comprehensive way now, understanding that big effects have long lasting, or big causes have long
multiple
lasting
generations.
effects, so.
Yeah, definitely multiple generations. And, I think we can all think back to our grandparents alone and really think about how what was available to them is completely different than what's available to us. But knowing that they raised our parents who then raised us tells us that what they went through and the trauma they had is still probably things that we're trying to overcome now, right? And we're going to talk about this later on, but even when you achieve higher education and you finally get into maybe the middle class with a decent job, there are a lot of other sort of generational curses, relationships, right? And money and how you think and feel about yourself, because maybe society hasn't told you to be very positive about yourself, that you have to really, break as well. But to go back to the education conversation, I think everything Chris said is exactly right. So if you think about how that has played out I'm going to talk about higher education, but also K-12 education historically, right? I think that's really important piece. So as he stated, the HBCUs opened shortly after the end of slavery, and some folks had access to those in the South. As you know, there's not a ton of those in the North. And then there was something called the land grant institutions that really helped open up multiple institutions across the country. And so at that moment, college education became more accessible to the common everyday man than just the elite populations. And then, as we all know, the GI Bill. So after World War I and World War II, there was a GI Bill that really made college even more accessible. But we know that people that tried to enter colleges at that point in time, even though they were veterans, even though they had fought in the exact same wars, right? And even though they had the exact same GI Bill, some of them were accepted at colleges and universities, and I'm specifically speaking to Black people, and some of them were not. So even with the GI Bill, like, people weren't accepted at the University of Alabama for 20 or 30 years later on, right? And so that was really accessible by sort of portions of the nation, and it was an individual institution act kind of in general. I would just say, I think now we are in a place And this is what excites me, is that there are people before us who ran their leg of the race as hard as they possibly could run their leg of the race. And they have handed the baton off to us. And we know the arc of the universe bends toward justice, but it's a long arc, right? And it's a long run, and this is a marathon. And what gets me excited in this moment is that for once, I really feel like we have momentum as a people, and we have more accessibility and opportunity than we ever had before. Not enough, but more than we have historically. And so for Detroit, as an example, we are seeing a lot of our kids go to college. So when I tell people these statistics, one, they're blown. They're like, oh, over 50% of kids in Detroit go to college? Yes. Oh, well over 50% of kids in Detroit go to college, typically between 55 and 62%. But the issue is the college campuses they're landing on, right? And how they do or do not accept them. Because although they're getting to college, they're not completing college. And so everybody feels like we've done the best job possible, and it's hard to even get the kids into college. But then you see so many kids come back, so many of them coming back with debt and no degree, right? And that's just a whole other thing. But I really feel like that's where the conversation is really shifting toward. And I know that colleges blame K-12 and all this kind of stuff, but really, we need both systems to get better, but we really need our colleges to just become even more welcoming environments. Because even if you're a smart Black person, right, there's going to be do I feel comfortable enough being myself in class? Am I going to be accepted? Is it a truly inclusive environment? All those types of things really pop up. And so really, I think where we are now is just, I just actually wrote a blog in the MCAN newsletter. I'm gonna drop that in a moment. But one of my points in the blog was representation matters. Okay, all of a sudden everybody's hiring a diversity, equity, and inclusion person. And don't get me wrong, that's a great thing, right? And all of a sudden everybody's hiring more Black people and more people of color. And you see more women rising up and taking leadership. And that's great. But really what we need is inclusive environments. We need the type of environments that don't judge you based on your skin, your religion, who you love, any of that really accept you for the quality of your character and what you have to contribute. And that you can't measure easily with data typically, right? And that's really, to me, like the next frontier. It's not just about representation, which I'm happy we have, and I'm happy we're moving into that direction, but what we need is inclusive environments. And higher education is a great place to really move that forward, because right now, most of our higher education environments are not inclusive. If you got to go to a multicultural center to feel welcome, there's a problem. You should be able to feel welcome no matter where you are on the campus. So.
I'd say much like Chris's context and what he gave to the conversation, I really want to give a space just to absorb that. I'm gonna utilize that space by talking so we can keep things rolling. But I think, no, you said some really important things, Ashley, and definitely the idea of representation mattering in 2021 and where that has to be different, because the representation alone is not enough. It has to be real coordinated efforts to work with our students and understand where they come from, understand the challenges they face, and advocate for them, knowing everything that you and Chris just shared with us for the last 15 minutes. So that's where I really want to pivot to talk to, our advisors and our outreach and engagement Vista, because in a lot of ways you're doing a lot of the student facing, like community facing work. So when you hear about systemic racism, how do you see that play out, and how do both you and your students cope with that?
It's interesting to see it sometimes, because a lot of times my students don't realize it's happening until it's too late. I'll see it and then I'll try to help. But again, as a Black person, it's kind of hard to navigate those spaces and then try to explain it to someone who doesn't really understand it as much. It's tough. I wish I had the key to fix it. I don't, but it's tough.
Deja, and this is where I'll get my hosting on, and I'm gonna be kind of working with y'all, throwing questions. You tell me what you see working for the district that you do, because Redford Union is in a district that's very different than a lot of my sites in the Metro Detroit region. There's unique challenges there.
It's very unique. So Redford is a predominantly white city. However, most of the students that go to Redford I want to say our population is about 85, and that's a pretty low number, % Black. Most of the board is white. Most of the like higher up, just like the superintendent now is white. Building principals are white, and then you have like these little black kids that don't get the same resources that they need to get, because they'll assume that these people who've worked in schools before, they're great people, but they're used to working with predominantly white kids and they can't transition with black kids. You see it every day. It's like in everything. Most of the people that are black are on the same, I'm gonna say the same level as me, but like there are advisors, a few counselors, not too many though, a few teachers. Like all the black people at Rutherford can probably stand in one room. So.
And Keela, I'm actually interested in hearing from your experiences, because you're in a pretty similar situation where your school, Robichaud, is in its own district, even though it's in Dearborn. It's not in the same district as the other prominent Dearborn high school. So I want to see where you may see similarities or what your perspective is there.
Yeah, so like Deja said, I guess just to speak on like resource wise, my school is in Dearborn Heights, which is I like to think of a pretty middle class status area. And within my district, which is technically Westwood, it's totally different. 85 to 90% of my students are Black. Majority of administration are white, except for the superintendent, who is actually Black, but the kids don't see that. But it's like I like to think like when I'm driving around just the Dearborn Heights area, when I'm in my district, you could kind of see the difference, because I'll go across the street to, let's just say, Dearborn High, and they have a completely new building. They have new books. They have unlimited resources, really. And then I come back across the street to my Westwood Community District, and we barely have updated books, and our building is falling apart, literally. And so that, and I know if I see that, the students in return see that, really. And so, yeah, it's hard.
I'm gonna swing to Delesiya real quick. You're from Lansing, correct? Yes. So where do you see Lansing kind of in comparison to some of the neighboring districts? Do you see any inequity there when we're comparing like Lansing to East Lansing, Hazlitt, Holt? I'm trying to think. There's one more I'm missing.
There's Grand Ledge, there's DeWitt, there's
Charlotte. Yeah.
Charlotte. There's a lot of them. But no, like I grew up in Lansing School District, public schools. I went to Everett. And so I kind of I'm sorry if I mispronounced. Kella, is it Kella? Kayla? I'm sorry. How do you say your name? Keela. There we go. Sorry. Kind of what Keela was saying, like you see it, when you go through neighborhoods. So growing up in, Lansing School District, we didn't have those resources that our surrounding, suburban neighborhoods would have. Like for my class, my graduating class, like our ACT score, our average was 16. And theirs was like, I want to say 25 and above. And I always kind of like wondered why like that was. Like I always knew we were different, but as you get older, you understand more. So I got to, understand more about why things are different, but it exists. And it definitely it sometimes does take a toll. You kind of start to question yourself sometimes. Well, why don't we have these resources? Like, why am I not, good enough to have this? Why do they get it? And then like you look at the students that go to those schools and, they're primarily white. Like you might see a handful of, I'm going to say people of color. You might see a handful of those, but they're primarily white people. And the school that I went to is extremely diverse. Like there were we were really diverse. Like even the classes I was in, like there was always people of color, like there was always a mixture. But then you look at those and it's just like, okay, well, are you saying that like you're better than us because you're mostly white? Like what exactly is it that you're trying to say? Like, why don't we get these resources? Especially because our schools, more often than not, were bigger than their schools. So it's like, we have more students, we should be getting more resources when we're the ones who really need it. So yeah, it was definitely a big problem growing up. Unfortunately, that is something that definitely still does exist in the Lansing School District. Resources are not the same in public schools as it is in suburban schools, even private schools. And it's something that we definitely need to work on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's real interesting, like when we see how that can sometimes be motivation for students when they're high functioning or they're with the low resources, and they kind of use that as the motivation of like, all right, well, how do I go to the next level knowing that there's this disparity here? Like, I think about being from Renaissance, and everybody always has great things to say about Renaissance, but what they don't tell you is when we were in high school, the year we won the city championship, means we were best school in the city at that sport, and we had to play all our baseball games at WC3, so we didn't have a baseball field. Go to Okemos High School and you see 3 baseball fields, or like huge resources for these middling athletic teams, because it's not about the merit, it's about what your district can pay for and what they provide. So that's always interesting. And so I guess my next question, and I'll start with you, Taylor, because I know you have experience to share, is like, are we seeing any changes in the schools that we serve? Is there like any real evidence that these inequities are being addressed, or do you feel like things are getting worse? And that's also including the context of what this year looks like, right? As COVID-19 related procedures and attainment for college students is getting ready to change drastically.
A part of my job is giving kids access or exposing them to the college culture in general or higher education, and then not having maybe administrative faculty interested in saying, okay, let me make sure you have the buses, maybe let me make sure you have the resources that you need. So that's something that is a hindrance to my service. And then on the flip side of that, you have students who, our school is, I would say the majority is Black, and then it's Latinx or Hispanic community, and then Middle Eastern. So then all of our teachers are white. There's maybe like a few Hispanic teachers, like 2 maybe. So then you have, going back to kind of like Ashley's point, where you have, and it kind of translates over from high school to college, where students are so used to having just white faculty, and then they go to college and they don't realize, like, and they still have white faculty, and they don't realize that that's an issue because it's been happening for so long. So as far as changes, I don't really see much. I wish there was more college advisors. I feel like it should be in every school. I feel like even in going back to my high school experience, I was dual enrolled, so we stayed on an extra year, our 13th year. And then in that 13th year, it was a class specifically for college readiness, specifically so that we can take trips to colleges, specifically so that reps can come in, so that we can talk about the FAFSA, so we can talk about all these things. And then to now be at my site and they have like me and that's it. And that goes for a lot of schools within my region, within my, Detroit, or the bordering schools and things like that. So I don't know if there's changes. I think that there is more conversation maybe about it, but as far as actively having things in place, we're not there yet. And there needs to be more than me at the school. There needs to be, I think, more than one high school counselor. I think that there's just a lot of things that needs to be in place. And I think that the administratives aren't really thinking about that. Even if we think about the pandemic, there's a lot of like, oh, we need to get the students back into school. And I'm like, well, y'all aren't actually in the building with these students. You are like in a totally different building, but you're not thinking about what that looks like for the students, what that looks like for their families, and what has transpired since last March in their households. So I just think that there's a lot of disconnect between the reality of what the students face, their families face, the community is facing, and the administrative's goal. So yeah, I think it has to start from, in my opinion, the top down. If you don't have the people, in the boardrooms or in the administrative roles who are not concerned about the people that's actually doing the work, then it's not going to happen. The change isn't going to happen. There's going to be a lot of band-aids, but not a lot of actual change. And that kind of goes back, I can't remember whose point it was, but it kind of goes back to, great, there's diversity, or you hired a Black teacher, or you hired a Black whatever, but again, are you allowing them to make the changes that they need to make? Are you allowing their voice to be heard? Are you allowing, going back to Ashley, are you allowing them to be their authentic self to help the community? Or is it just a promotional ad? So, I think that there's a lot of change that needs to happen, but everyone needs to be on board. Everyone has to work as a team. Everyone has to see and understand and have empathy with what's happening, and not assume that everyone has the same circumstances and wants the same things. So yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit of communication from administrative roles and those who are actually like boots on the ground in the community, in the schools, doing the work. What needs to happen? And it needs to be more listening than speaking. It needs to be a lot of again, teamwork and communication, and people willing to make action, to take action and actually make change. So that was long-winded, but yeah.
That was a great long-winded though. I really appreciate everything you said. And I think one of the things we're really not understanding when we say boots on the ground, that's a phrase I personally don't really like, but I think I don't like it because we're not understanding that for some of our students, this attainment piece is like a war. We use the war lingo, but not recognize what the war is and what it looks like. I think you've really uncovered what's the perfect storm of like this year, the real pandemic year, because the school year definitely 2019-20 was impacted by that, and what the shutdown meant for a lot of those students and how that was handled. But this year, there's so many challenges that we've gotten to see from the implementation as to where we are now. And I'll open this up for the whole panel, but we know historically enrollment drive dollars. So like when we talk about Lansing high school districts and you see students going to those neighboring districts, then what gets cut? Music and arts funding and sports and PE and things. And so who's going to send their student there? They'll send them somewhere else, but that affects the students that are there. Thinking about college enrollment, if college enrollment is down, funding for programs can be affected. So we've come to a point of pressure for everybody involved on this panel. How do you advocate for students? How do you really invest in their future knowing that there is that pressure there? Like, how do we alleviate that? And I know I'm not asking for any panelist to have a solution. That is not possible, but I really want us to share. And I think it's also a question that I saw about like the college, how do you talk to students about college during online learning? How are you advocating for them to take something, to take this dive into the unknown? And where does that struggle come into play for all of you in your different levels and positions? And be honest, this is a candid, safe space. As your facilitator, I want my audience to know that I've told my panelists to share, and understanding that we're all inextricably linked to this work, understand their perspectives and be thinking, how can we solve this as a greater unit?
So I'll speak for a second. So I don't actually work with students, but I do have a cousin who's a senior this year, and I've kind of been that voice for her to get out there and go to school. And for me, with her, it's just been having candid conversations about what all school will entail. Like, different schools give you different resources, different options. It's going to look differently for you. Going to a PWI versus a HBCU, it's not going to be the same. One of her schools, I want to say it's actually in Tennessee, one of her dream schools that she wants to go to. I'm like, do it. I think it's a HBCU. But you have to realize, like, it's going to look different than where you are now. It's going to be different. You do have to ready yourself, but also just like letting her know that you don't have to do it alone. You have support. I've gone through, I was the first grandchild to actually go through school. So I'm kind of just like giving her that wisdom that I learned. So she already has it and she's prepared to kind of fight that battle and address those things. But again, just being that support system, making sure that she knows that, okay, if you stumble into something, you can come to me. I can help you out. Like, I've been through this before. It may not be the same situation, but I can help you through it. I will support you. I will be your network if I have to. So just kind of making sure like she understands that before she puts herself out there in that situation.
Thank you for that, Delesiya. Does anybody else want to dive in with their thoughts?
I agree with Delesiya. I think including your college access story is super important. You know, for me, especially, like I'm a first generation student, so and most of my students are as well. So just making sure, like, I understand your fear. I understand the unknown of it all, and the fear of the unknown is huge, not just with the student, but also the parent. And then just answering every single question, being as detailed as possible, being honest. You know, a lot of their questions are, what is it like? Is it worth it? What's another big question? Of course, affordability, you know, and things like that. So honestly, like, tackling the affordability piece was first, because that's usually the biggest fear. I don't want to have loans. I don't want to be in debt. And then, you know, the families also kind of, depending on the family situation, sometimes the student is a part of bringing in money, you know, to the family. So then having that conversation of, okay, I'm advocating for the student because they want to go to college, but I also understand that this is a student who would be helping you bring in money to the family. So having those conversations. So a lot of it is just breaking it down to the simplest form. And then if you aren't the right person that they need to talk to, like I've had some undocumented students this semester or this year. And I'm like, I am not the person that's going to make your family feel comfortable. I've asked for meetings and, you know, all these type of things. So finding outside resources that makes that family feel comfortable, working with an organization like Michigan Hispanic Collaborative, and having them come in and speaking their own language, understanding, I know your community, I understand your culture, I understand your fears. I can't relate to that. So, you know, just making sure that you're collaborating with the people who are going to help them, make them feel more comfortable and give them the information that they need, even if it isn't you. So, yeah, just communicating, breaking everything down to the simplest terms is, you know, let them know what there is to expect financially, the environment, depending on what school they want to go to, just all of those things. You know, don't leave any stone unturned, if that makes sense.
I want to throw it to you, Ashley, especially given your with DCAN, you're knee deep in what those needs are looking like for Detroit students. I want to definitely hear from you where this year has been challenging and what you're seeing, what trends. Because I also like the fact that you said you feel like the momentum is there. So I know that like there's a lot of energy to get students through and help them stay in college. And so, you know, where there's challenges, I know there have been successes and that there are things on the horizon.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be pretty candid. I really think the pandemic has shown us places that were already kind of leaks in the pipeline that we were plugging with Band-Aids are now like broken wide open, right? I mean, it's really showed us where things were already broken and those things have just become even more broken. And I would say like the way that that's really showing up for seniors right now is around engagement. You know, I just, you know, I'm a millennial person. And so, you know, I'm definitely the kind of person that's like, I wonder how we can make this better. Maybe we should just start all over from scratch, but we really need to rethink high schools, period. Like, and our kids are just completely unengaged. You know, they don't want to log online. And so what we're saying in Detroit, it's hard to even have the college access conversation. They won't even log on to an English class that they need to graduate. So right now I'm really concerned about high school graduation. And if high school graduation does happen for these kids, the enormous losses in academic, just like knowledge, because of the, you know, how things get lost in translation online. And so yeah, that's the biggest thing I'm concerned about. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard the data, but the district has seen, and most of our schools in Detroit have seen like ridiculous increases in the number of Fs that even our highest flying kids would have never had we been face to face. And so you're seeing a lot of our districts here, and I mean to say like in the high school space, charter and DPSCD are giving kids for Ds are giving them no grades, and for Fs they're giving them incompletes, and they're not counting them toward their GPAs at all. And so we're going to see a lot of things that we got to get ready for. So I think there's like really two big things here. Like, how do we help every kid we can help now? But how do we get downstream and build something for all the folks that fell out of the pipeline that was broken? Because that's real. We're just going to lose a lot of people. So although I was seeing hope, Josh, I would say the pandemic kind of just like crashed that. So I think, you know, in Detroit, that's what I'm trying to sound the alarm on is like, yeah, let's help as many 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 kids as we can. But we need policies in place because some of them are going to be lost for now. And they're going to 2 or 3 years into their entry-level job. Hopefully they'll be ready to make a different choice, make a different decision. We got to make that a very smooth, easy pathway for them. And so we got to be building both of those things right now. And so, yeah, that's what we're seeing. Kids aren't even showing up for school. And that's the biggest thing. And I know a lot of people are going back face to face, and I've heard people who are going back face to face, these kids are already lost. They're not even coming back. And so that's probably the biggest issue that we're seeing. And if that one can't be fixed, it's really hard to really drive enrollment, persistence, and graduation. So,
yeah. And I'm glad that you touched on policy. We got a really good question that came in. And so having my notes, I was prepared to kind of jump around, but you know, a lot of it is thinking like specifically, give me 1 second. The question that was posed was, what role do you think MCAN, so the National College Access Network, and other national policy organizations can play in helping with college accessibility? So like thinking like, the question I had for today, knowing that we would have representatives not only from just MCAN, Advise Michigan, but we also have some partners from our local college access networks. Ashley, of course, and I think I saw Michelle from CapCan is here as well. But what do we need to be doing more on that on all levels? And maybe this is somewhere I can start with your perspective, Chris. Like NCAN, MCAN, LCAN, Advise Michigan, Completion Core, like where we're all working to support the students. What do we need to do to work with circumstances perpetuated by COVID?
Yeah, and what's interesting about this time that Ashley noted is what I'm a big fan of is rethinking high school. And while that's more of a long-term solution, and it doesn't necessarily solve for the gaps that we have now, it is something we are in a prime opportunity to do that. As superintendents and school systems and families are having to reinvent how we enter school, how we partake of school, so to speak, is, excuse me, is being reinvented in real time. And so we have, this is also a very difficult time, but it's also a lot of opportunity. So I do concur that there is some momentum, because now that we have to reinvent school, this is an opportunity to reinvent the whole system. And so as we look at how we're supposed to do it, and I always implore my advisors, and I always say, you know, you all are going on to grad school. This is something that you all will be able to take up and work on, and think about that as you look at your trajectory and continue to your educational career. But also, how do we influence policy, right? And something that MCAN as well as NCAN is definitely focused on. And while the way that we've been able to influence policy has been sort of chipping away at the rock, or sort of water dripping on rock to wear it down, how can we ramp that up? You know, what are the actions that we take to push? You know, politicians move. I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican, they move. Two things make them move: votes and money, right? And so if you don't have the money, then you can garner the votes, and you can force policy through how you address them and the things that you ask for. And so begin to have those conversations within your local communities and within the broader community about what is it that we need to see as we approach this equity question, as COVID has pulled the veil off of all the inequities in the society. What are the things that we need to see in this new society that we have an opportunity to build now, and begin to have those conversations among ourselves, internally, externally, and then with broader context within our groups and within places and spaces that we're in, having them at our family dinner tables. I think the opportunity exists for us to recreate a better society, a more equitable education system, while we have this window of opportunity before we end up settling back into our ways, if things go back into the way they were. I don't think they will, because there is a lot of momentum out here around this conversation. And I think it'll be up to every one of us to keep it going in whatever spaces we move into. And to also keep telling your college access story. I never knew how important it was until later in my life, and that it resonated with so many people. And I've had college access stories, and I've had my advisors use their access stories, just being real and humble with students, no matter if they were a wealthy student in a poor community, a Black student in a white community, and vice versa. Just being open and honest about the challenges that you faced and how we engage our students. You know, I think on both ends of those spectrums, as we continue to push students now to make sure that they're making the decisions necessary to support themselves, but also how do we push policy moving forward? And for advisors in this space, pushing policy moving forward might be something you work on long-term. You can also do it through direct activism, but definitely as a long-term process, what are the things that we need to research and write to create a school system, or to create systems that work for all of us?
Yeah, I think I agree with Chris. You know, I think I think one of the things that I'm noticing is there is this whole narrative around that, to me, needs to be corrected. There's a lot of narratives, but this is one that I'm seeing playing out even more due to the pandemic, about this whole full-time versus part-time going to school thing. I think, and especially when it comes to being successful in a 4-year, specifically in community college. And so I think we have to acknowledge that our kids need to work, and we need to create college access programs that can work with employers better. I just really think that's the place that we got to go. And right now, because we refuse to acknowledge that our kids are working and not coming to high school, right? Or, you know, are taking a job at Amazon rather than going to community college, or, you know, doing all these things because they have immediate needs. And you're not going to get your immediate needs met by going to college. you're a broke college student, right? You're trying to figure out how to pay somebody, nonetheless make money. So I just feel like that's one of the things I think from an MCAN perspective that can be done is like, we need to raise up and find national best practices that are doing this well, that are like, okay, you can work and you can go to college and you can still be successful. And how do we help our kids do that so they're not making a choice? And right now we're so busy trying to avoid that we're just pushing full-time, we're going to lose them. Like, I think that's one thing that I think we could do. I think the other thing is, and I think MCAN is going to do this, we need to really be thinking about comeback programs, like I was saying earlier, and building those in all of our communities. And right now with Michigan Reconnect, it starts at 25, but we really need something in the gap between kind of like 20 to 25. So I would say something like that. And then I would say like we have academic readiness loss at really, really high levels. And so I think at communities and MCAN should also be thinking about how do we support our higher education institutions with the students they're going to be getting that may have academic readiness losses exacerbated from what they already had, but how do we help them still get through? And then the last thing I would say, I think MCAN can do, and I see them doing it a lot now, is this K-12 conversation. And how do we really help our K-12 spaces, as somebody said, what Taylor said, not just hiring a college advisor is one step, it's representation. It's not an inclusive environment, right? It's not a college going environment when it only happens in the classroom and I got to go pull somebody out because the teachers don't understand why this is important. Actually, I can't even pull them out of class. I just got to see them hopefully in the hallway or at lunchtime. So how do we move beyond that to really create like college going culture and like inclusive like environments in high schools that really are speaking to kids' futures, not just their right now? And so I think like all those things need to be done. And I think they all could be pushed and done from a policy perspective. I think MCAN has done it with FAFSA. Like MCAN made FAFSA important to every high school, every state nationally, over 2 or 3 years of pushing it. And I think they can do it in multiple ways. I think they're the reason that FAFSA got fixed. Thank goodness. I think they're the reason that Pell Grant is going to get fixed and things like that. And I think if they lean in those places, I think we'll have a better system in about 10 years.
10 years is a long time though. Yeah.
It is. I think it is.
A lot
Yeah,
changes
sorry.
in a decade, especially when you talk to anybody who grew up in the 80s and what the 90s was different. And then of course, what we see between millennials and Gen Z, everything changes in a decade. So just want to, as a host, I want to acknowledge the fact that we're coming up on our proposed time for the meeting. I'm a big proponent of letting my panelists and people who are sharing their expertise have the floor, not be bound by time, but at the understanding, one, this is a Friday. Two, professionally, we all have very important work that we're doing. So if you're in the audience and you need to scoot out in the next 5 minutes, then 100%. I am recording this virtual panel for us to be able to share after we're done. So if you feel like you may miss out on anything, we got you. We'll accommodate you. For my panelists, I understand that the 90-minute may be all that we can ask for your time in sharing, but if people are willing to stay and we want to extend the conversation a little bit, I'm also willing as host to be able to do that. But also a good question just came up in the chat about at least everybody in the panel dropping their Twitter handles or some way to connect, like so a social media like handle that you use, or maybe if you feel comfortable sharing your email where people can ask more follow-up questions. Let's just take time. You all can do that. But I do want to make sure while we still have some time formally left in our 90 minutes, I think the big question that we also have to ask ourselves now is that with college, with that post-secondary enrollment, a lot of people think that the goal is getting to college, but quite frankly, there are two things that we know happen after a student gets accepted. One, down the line, is that maybe they get to college and they find out that there's a lot of factors that keep them from completing. But also the big one that I think we need to discuss, because I'm sure we'll see it this summer in that summer melt. And also thinking about as a supervisor, when I talk with my advisors, I'm really clear, I think it'd be pretty easy to say, all right, I'm going to get my student to consider these options. I'll help them sign up. But really knowing if they're going to go is a difference. And a lot of students probably feel very conflicted, like we've all said, but maybe pushed into college. So summer melt, how do we prepare for it, and why, and where do we see this hitting the Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color much harder this year?
Question, what is summer melt?
Essentially, when students say they're going to school but don't go to school. And then over the summer, a lot of things can take place that can keep someone from actually stepping in place on campus.
And I think one space that I think we can begin to look at and really think about more seriously, and I know Ashley and I have had conversations around this, is, you know, and it's not necessarily the role of the space of the advisor, but I think we have to think about as a community how we mentor kids through college, and that how and where that how we you know, how do we build it out, right? So that there's a network. We used to call it a conspiracy of care around these students as they work to, from the time they decide they're going to college to the time. Well, first of all, how do we prepare them to think about college to the time they decide to go to graduation? And I would even say, as Ashley knows, working on her doctorate degree and master's degree, you still need mentors, right? And so how do we build this conspiracy of care around, and that's a big picture thing, obviously it doesn't solve the immediate, but how do we create this conspiracy of care around our students to make sure that we make sure they don't go through the summer melt, and make sure also that they graduate.
And we've been doing summer melt for about 3 years and learned a lot, but I wouldn't say we're experts at all. And I know I see a bunch of other LCANs on here and other people. So I don't know if they have more ideas around summer melt, but I think the biggest thing is that summer melt has to start in the middle of the senior year, because if you try to pop up in the summer and reach out to kids, they're gonna be like, who this? Like, who is this? No, I'm like, they're gonna dodge you. They're gonna ghost you. And so you really wanna make sure that you're starting the summer melt in like March, April, May, and helping them understand these services are gonna be available to them then. And then you do also, I feel like it can't just be a summer melt. This is what we're learning. It's got to be something that's going to be there for them throughout college, as Chris was just now stating. But there are other people on the call, so I'd love to hear what your ideas are for helping students.
I think that it honestly needs to be a better connection between colleges and the high school. My service term ends in June. Most teachers are done during the summer in June. Okay, June through August or September, now there's all this time that maybe a form needs to be done, but the student doesn't know how to turn it in, doesn't really reach out to the college, and I'm not there to really tell them how to do it. Maybe $500 came up. The student didn't know how to come up with that extra $500 just out of nowhere. I think when it comes to reinventing the entire process of like what high school is and the next transition, that also needs to be a part that's always thought about. I can't, that's all, like, that's something part of the system that just has to be fixed, because it's I honestly think that's part of the system that wasn't made for us to succeed in the first place. It's just another added thing. There just needs to be more resources in general just for students to have a better bridge program. So I know like some colleges have bridge programs, but not all of them have bridge programs, and all of them don't talk about the importance of turning in forms and checking your emails and turning in your financial, like just like little things that will make summer melt a little less non-existent than it is.
Yeah, I think you guys hit on some really crucial points. And just in terms of like facilitating the way, I definitely wanted that to be where we ended going into the 1:30, but now that we're past that time, there's something interesting I thought about summer melt before we even really got to the pandemic. And it was influenced by an advisor I worked with in our partnership previously with Jalen Rose Leadership Academy. And this was my very first year as a supervisor. So I love data and I love seeing data. And he gives me this graph that shows me where Jalen Rose students are going and where they're staying. And then I learned things about schools like Grand Valley State and how they're supporting students of color. That's not necessarily every student's first thought when they think where they're going. Like we think about U of M and Michigan State and maybe even Wayne State or Central Western Eastern before we would think about Grand Valley State. But there was one interesting thing that he did with that data, and he showed me that Wilberforce University, which was a historically Black college I'd never heard of. I'm not ashamed to admit it, that I'd never heard of until he said, this is a place where we have been sending students and they stay. So I'm going to do more rep visits with this school because that's where my kids go and they stay and they feel supported. And it brought me to an interesting thought process over the course of this year about like some of our state goals and what coincides with like the state vision for education. There are no HBCUs in Michigan. So what happens to the attainment rate and the completion rate in the state when people are saying, hey, go to a HBCU because you will be supported? The inequity in like, there's a goal and then there's what your students need, and thinking about what policy change there needs to happen. But I did want to use that to pivot into like your college experiences and what made you stay. You know, where did you find that support? Was it more of a like protracted struggle or a battle of attrition where you like, yeah, I survived? Or did you really have a chance to connect with people who got you through your college experience? And, you know, where do we see that as an option for our Black students, even if it is out of state, for them to go to HBCUs and feel that support?
As much as I love helping the goal of 60 by 2030, I would love to push my kids to go to my HBCUs so they can feel like a sense of community and understand where their place is in the world. However, there's no money for my kids to go there. My kids don't have the talents, like they don't have the basketball talent. They don't have the band talents. They don't have those things. Like they would love to go to HBCUs the more they learn about them. But when there's state programs like TIP that gives my students money to go to community college or fair state for free, I mean, I just got to push where my kids can go, like for better financially. I would want my kids to be more supported and feel like they're at home, but I can't do that. Like consciously, I can't.
I agree with Deja for sure. Also, because Wilberforce and Central State are the only ones closest to us, those are the only like reps that we tend to work with. The only other one is Tara Stowe that I've worked with before. But it's so hard to like also expose them to HBCUs that are not, because they're far. So then, you know, trying to figure out how can we get and bus students there, and then that goes into resources and budgets and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I wanted to, of course, before the pandemic, you know, do a busing situation so that they could do a college tour, HBCU college tour situation to get that exposure. But if they don't see it and we can't bring it to them, they're like, I mean, okay, it's just another college to me. They don't understand the difference or the experience that could be different, you know, unless it's been taught to them, or, you know, I had a cousin that went to this HBCU, so I know about that. If they don't, then it's just like, why is this important? why do we, you know, what's the difference? So yeah, I mean, it's lack of exposure and being able to bring those resources to them, that's difficult as well.
And I think too, another issue that I'm starting to see like now more than ever is GPAs and grades. A lot of my students don't have the GPA requirements to apply to these HBCUs or other colleges and universities. So majority of my time is being spent on, let's find a good community college, let's find some trades, let's find a school that has a support system, or, you know, for students who come in with lower GPAs. And the fact that SAT scores are not being like heavily impacted as much, is like they don't have anything but their GPAs to go off of. So if a student isn't performing well academically now, I feel like it will be me doing a disservice to them to send them out of state to a school that they really more than likely won't succeed at.
hopping in, I did have an experience. I remember when and I think Chris, you had unmuted, so I'll swing to you next. But something I thought about was I had an experience with a young man when I was in New York. He was a member of the community center I worked at in Brooklyn, just as like a youth advocate, and he had the grades, and yes, he was getting a lot of scholarship opportunities to go to a lot of East Coast HBCUs. But I remember that day getting him to the college fair to be able to do that meant me, community member, renting a car, because anyone who's ever lived in New York knows to get somewhere fast, if you're not hitting that subway in at time, then you're not getting there. And it was like, well, I will rent a car and I will make sure that we get there. And so like it took me doing that, not a school teacher, not a counselor. And had I not been available, or anyone else in my office not been available, that could have been a very missed opportunity. So even thinking about some of the ways that these, that the HBCUs, like, because recruiting out of state looks different for them. So a lot of it is not necessarily, I will send somebody all the way from Tennessee or Florida. And I know they're connected to areas in the state, but a lot of times it's that little layer of accessibility that could be the difference between a student having an opportunity to go somewhere and not, and just keeping that in mind as well. But Christopher, I definitely saw you had your hand up, so let me swing over to you.
Yeah, and really, I mean, COVID once again presents opportunities and challenges. I mean, now we have to do virtual college tours, but at one point, if we're able to get back to regular college visits, think about some of those of you who are working in and around urban communities. Oftentimes, the HBCUs, or there's a group of HBCU graduates that are hosting college fairs, and I know that this has started taking place over the last several years. And they not only host college fairs, but they host trips. Now, the challenge is that the trips cost money, but some of these organizations have scholarships that are available. And as advisors, one of the things to think about is who are those places. Oftentimes it's through a church within those communities that are doing these HBCU tours when we get back to taking these physical tours, because they can go down there. And I know HBCUs that are, they do on, admittance on the spot, sometimes if you go down there. But the hard part is getting them down there, right? And getting them down there to have that experience and to actually see it, outside of some virtual or platform or some photograph or someone talking to them about it. But it is a unique experience. I am a HBCU advocate. My daughter went to a HBCU. She's now at the University of Michigan. And it is a pathway because there is a nurturing and a historical culture. My friend went to a HBCU, and I knew about the HBCU all my life, but I just didn't realize that when I went on campus and visited with her, that this was the place where they planned the Montgomery boycotts, right? They've got markers all over the place where this is where Dr. King met, and this is where Rosa Parks was, and this, that, and the other. And that legacy and history is just extraordinary to be in that space and in that place. And so I think it's crucial that we find creative ways to introduce our students to the HBCU experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then also thinking about that added layer of, like, the same way with what we call predominantly white institutions where there's the name recognition, also thinking about getting our students chances to become familiar with the HBCUs that aren't Howard, Hampton, FAMU, Bethune-Cookman, and learning more about your Harris Stowe's and Tillotson's and places that are really looking to cultivate like young Black minds in a space and are willing to do what it takes to get them there and keep them there. All right, so I think I've got one more formal question, and then maybe for a small amount of time I can get into a Q&A if anyone wants to drop anything in the chat, or you can either use the raise hand function and you can ask a question live. But representation in education, these are all areas that, whether they're the advisors who are doing the student facing work or those of us here who are doing the intermediary work, I want to talk more about what Ashley said earlier about representation and how much that matters. Like, how much representation are you seeing? What do you think needs to change in order to give Black students more advocacy?
A lot. Oh.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Deja.
So the randomest thing happened to me like my first year. I think it had to be maybe my second week as an advisor. I was in the classrooms, I was doing presentations, or we were talking about like resumes and like what makes you like look better and what do you want colleges to know about you and what you want jobs to know about you. So we had like this thing of like adjectives, and I was like, okay, well, pick 5 good adjectives about yourself that you will want a job or a school to know about you and why you should be accepted into that job or school. Kids had them, great, love them. The kid asked me about me, and I was like, I really don't know. I didn't plan that. This is for you to figure out, not me. And I was like, well, what are some qualities you think that I have that you will want? Like, what are some qualities you think that I have that makes me a good candidate for my job or to be your advisor and things like that? And somebody was like, you're very relatable. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And they was like, well, Ms. Clemens, you're like 5 years older than us. You're Black. You're from the city. You did it. You made it. You went to a popular school, like a party school, and you made it. Like it was like that. And it was like it was my second week, so I almost started crying. I'm like, I don't even know how to take it. Like so, like I think is like very important the students have that like just basic representation that someone that looks like them, that came from the same place as them, could stick it out, can figure it out, could make it, and it can make a big difference, and it could be you one day.
Yeah, kind of just to add on to that relatability piece. I feel like when we see ourselves in someone else, we're more likely to achieve what we want to achieve. So being able to see someone such as, a Black doctor and you're wanting to be a doctor, it's still heavily white and male. So let's say you're a Black woman who wants to be a doctor. Seeing a Black woman in that position and being able to see yourself in her, it gives you a sort of drive that you can do it, like you can make it, you can be that doctor yourself. Like it makes you believe, it makes it more than a dream. It kind of makes it a reality that you're capable of doing it. So just seeing people who look like you in certain positions that normally people who look like you wouldn't be in, it makes the world of a difference. And again, like they're more relatable because more often than not, they have similar stories to yours. Whereas, a non-person of color, they may not have that same story. They may not have that same background. They may not have that same understanding of your culture and where you come from. So representation, kind of everything, it means so much, especially for a younger generation. As things are starting to change, you need to see people who look like you in positions that you're going for.
Absolutely. I think about a lot of our structures around in this topic of conversation, and a lot of it makes me think about college access, but also philanthropy and who's getting money and who's being given a chance to lead. And I mean, even thinking about like Ashley's presence here as a LCAN executive director and being a person of color, where it's not very prevalent in our state, and it may not even be prevalent in college access networks around the country, and that's a big deal. And I think each of you here has a unique ability to be able to bring that together. You have a unique perspective in a lot of ways. You're gonna be we talk about the voice of the voiceless, but not all of our students aren't voiceless. They do have voices. They just need someone to kind of facilitate the ability for them to be able to talk more. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's in the audience. I think I've covered most of my agenda. Panelists are open for questions if we want to take a few minutes. Please share with us if you have a question you'd like to ask or something you feel like was not covered, something you'd like to share. And we'll probably be wrapping up shortly after that. All right, I think I'm going to read this. This is from Alex. This question keeps coming up, and I'm just going to throw it out there. I am a white college completion coach. I have several students in my cohort who are of color who are not getting back to me. How should I get their attention? What type of angle should I come from? I feel like they need to see someone that looks like them, that looks like them. Could I work with one of you in the future and maybe speak to my students at Mid-Michigan?
I feel like a big part of what makes students turn off from talking to people that don't look like them. I mean, obviously if they don't look like them, but when you come to them, do you come to them as a white savior, or do you come to them, I guess somebody's gonna like be Superman and save them? Are you coming to them understanding where they are, what struggles they had? Your life is not going to be the same as theirs, things like that. So I have mentors that look absolutely. I have white women people, white women people. I have white women mentors that don't have the same background as me, but when I talk to them, especially about law school, they come to me like when it comes to this choices, they'll say things like, "I understand that you picking this school is going to be different from you because it's races out there. The population and demographic is different. That'd be completely up to you if you want to take that." Like that's like, just come to them in a way that's not, this is the best thing for you, and I understand it's the best thing for you because I'm in a better place than you. And that doesn't just go for when you're not a person of color, you're talking to a person of color. Like it can be class too. Like just because you went to college and they haven't been to college yet, or you have a degree and they don't have one yet, try not to step on their experiences just because you don't understand them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just being yourself. I think sometimes there's a lot of overthinking and feeling like you should have a certain approach. But honestly, the right approach is being yourself. And I think working with high school students, they are someone who will read you a mile away if you are fake, if you're trying to sell something, whatever. They can spot it. So I think that you being yourself, maybe, collaborating with one of us, or, someone that's in your area that is interested in talking to students, why not? Sure. That's a good option. But yeah, I think just being yourself, listening more than talking, not assuming anything about your students is key. Asking them what they want, what their needs are, and not assuming that you know what they need, because honestly you don't. So yeah, just communicating from a space of tell me what you need from me. What questions do you have? What concerns or fears, or anything like that. I think just coming from a place of wanting that engagement with them, but not putting on your own agenda or assumptions helps.
All right, thank you, Taylor and Deja, for sharing that. So I think we're gonna go ahead and close out here. One thing I definitely wanted to say was a good strategy that was shared in the chat about with your tip eligible students, maybe working a plan that allows them to utilize the money to attend community college and then transfer to a HBCU. I think that that's a pathway that we haven't talked about specifically. So I think that that was a really good idea that I want to make sure gets into the recording, because I've also saved the chat. So there were some gems in there that I would probably compile and send out to everybody. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Shout outs to my 4 panelists that are still here. Chris, you're in the second row now, so I didn't see you. If you have any last parting comments you'd like to share before we leave, feel free. Otherwise, everybody who's spent their Friday afternoon with us, I really enjoy the energy that we got from you, the collaboration, the immersion, and it doesn't stop here. This is chapter 1, and thinking about college access and equity for our students. So let's keep the conversation going. So panel, anyone that wants to sign off, we can. All right, on behalf of my panelists, Jahshua Smith, thank you for joining us, and be well, be safe, and enjoy your weekend.